Welcome to Wonder Paws Down Under. I'm Dan.
I'm Anita.
And together we're travelling around Australia with our dog Wally, our cat Paprika, our off-road caravan, and our trusty turd Hilux.
And we're here to bring you some pet travelling tips on the road. And today we're going to talk about a little bit more of a serious topic than our usual spiels. Unfortunately, when you are travelling around Australia, there are some big concerns. One being 1080 baiting.
Definitely. I think this is probably the biggest concern for anyone looking to travel with their pets around Australia, and I would rate it as my number one most hazardous hidden danger. Probably even over and above ticks, which we can cover in a separate episode, but yeah, this is a really important topic, and I do apologise, we will get a little bit heavy because this is a heavy topic. In the end, we're talking about the lives of our pets, whether you're travelling with a dog, a cat, maybe something else, someone else. But yeah, it's a crucial topic. So we're going to delve into a little bit of detail, both technical and also some things that we've learned along the road now that we've done about 6 months of our travels.
Now, we don't want to completely scare you because we have found ways to get around most of the concerns, when traveling in these areas. Unfortunately, the areas really do cover a fair portion of Australia and mostly in rural areas. But we have found ways to kind of ease our minds as much as possible, but there's always a risk. So please listen carefully. And we want to let you know that we are not professionals. We are not, trying to encourage or discourage. We just wanted to give the information that we have, that we know and we've learned. But please note that you have to do your own research. You have to make these decisions for yourself. And I guess we'll start with what is
1080 baiting. Well, before we do, I also just want to
sorry.
mention we're not going to be going into any moral arguments about whether 1080 baiting is right or wrong. That is not the forum for this. There's lots of reasons why the government and landowners do bait with 1080 bait. We're not going to get into it here. We're just going to get into what can you expect on the road, what do you need to look out for,
and how it really affects you on your trip around Australia.
So, what is it? I'm going to read this out because it's a little bit technical. 1080 is known as sodium fluoroacetate. So it's a highly toxic white fluffy powder, but it's actually odorless and tasteless. And it is a Schedule 7 poison, which means in Australia you need a permit in order to procure and use it. Typically it's distributed either in pellets, like little sausage pellets, or it can actually be dissolved into cuts of meat. Because it is water soluble, it can easily be put onto basically any surface, and most of us, if not all of us, would be none the wiser. That being said, it is highly appetizing to canines and felines, which makes it very dangerous for your pets. It's even so dangerous that just even a lick of a pellet or a piece of contaminated meat is enough to probably kill your pet. So what is it used for? I mean, from what we gather, it's used to control feral cats, feral dogs, feral pigs, and rabbits. Obviously, these are big pests in Australia. Different regions have different sort of pests, but this is a poison that's used pretty consistently all around the country. Generally, there's no threat to native wildlife from 1080. The reason is there is a similar compound which is found in some Australian native plants like the acacia. It's called potassium fluoroacetate, and being found naturally, a lot of natural fauna. A lot of natural fauna does have some sort of, tolerance towards the 1080 poison, and that's why it's mostly targeted towards the ferals. But, obviously the difference between a feral dog, a feral cat, and a domestic dog and cat is zero, and that's where the danger lies.
Yeah, like it does distinguish between maybe a kangaroo, but whether you're a wild dog, a dingo, or your best mate, Wally, that's where it becomes really scary because unfortunately it doesn't discriminate against those things. So
where can we find it?
Oh gosh, it feels like we found it everywhere. So generally the areas will be marked with 1080 baiting, but please just know that that's not all the time, and know that any of the stations are possibly using 1080 baits.
That's cattle or sheep stations.
That's correct. And the best way to sort of navigate that is when you're calling up to make your booking, just ask them. Just ask, is 1080 bait used at your cattle station? And you'll usually get a pretty straight answer that it's at particular times of the year, that maybe it is, but generally if you have your dog on the leash, it'll be okay in certain areas. So just look, speak to the station owners, but always know that there is a potential risk no matter what. So it was used in every single state that we've been to thus far. Different areas, different terrains. But it was, unfortunately, it's been everywhere.
I will also add to Anita's point earlier, just because a station or any property is considered pet friendly or allows pets, does not mean it is safe.
Yes, so still check.
We've found a number of stations, particularly on the Gibb River Road. They do bait, and the baiting area can be literally right behind the campground, for example. And why that can be an issue is, and this is the scariest bit, unfortunately, whilst great care may be taken to lay the baits in particular areas, there have been instances where birds have picked up the baits and dropped them sometimes kilometres away. And that presents a really, really difficult scenario when you're staying close to these areas, because you literally have no control over whether or not it is baited.
And I guess that just comes, with just you really need to make decisions for yourself as to what you feel comfortable with. I'm not going to lie, I've lived in anxiety throughout these places pretty much the whole entire time that we've visited them. But Wally is still with us for the time being, and we have managed to get around it. And we have and Paprika, sorry, of course. But Paprika doesn't venture as much as Wally, so you kind of feel a little bit safer with Paprika. But just, knowing that you still need to make these decisions for yourself, but there are sort of ways that you can make yourself feel a little bit better. But they're typically national parks, cattle stations, sheep stations, some state forests,
private property,
like the property that we were currently staying on. They've told us that they do use 1080 baiting at particular times, but they will let everyone in the area know, because people do have dogs. They lock up their dogs for the period while the 1080 baits are being laid. So look, again, best way of just making yourself feel at ease is check with the places that you're staying at, because as Daniel said, even if it's pet friendly, dog friendly, that doesn't mean that they're not baited nearby and in the same areas. Okay, so that's I just want to really run that home and just keep that fresh in your mind.
And look, try and use the internet as well as much as you can. The WA government has a really handy virtual map where it shows where the 1080 baited places are. Unfortunately, that map is not exhaustive, so it doesn't cover private property. It may not even cover every station. So we have found gaps in that map where we've rocked up and a 1080 sign has been there. So definitely don't just rely on what you see on the internet. You do your diligence when you arrive at a destination. Just be super careful. And this even applies to places where, let's say you're going in between and you want to stop at a rest stop, you want to let the dog, go under a tree and cock his leg up if he's a boy. We have heard instances firsthand where people have let their pets out at a rest stop that does not have signs. They've licked up a bait or picked up a bait, and along the journey the dog has passed away. So there's no real easy answer here. Just exercise extreme caution, and we'll also talk about some of the ways that will prevent this later down the track in this episode.
And look, it sounds scary, but it is scary. And we have pretty much, if I think of the places just off the top of our heads, like where we have been, where this has been an issue, it's South Australia, Flinders Ranges, Oodnadatta, regional parts of South Australia, driving from, down the Oodnadatta track all the way to Central Australia, Kalbarri region, and then nominated rest stops and stuff around that region, Shark Bay and the surrounding areas, including rest stops, Quabba, Nalu, Wurrura Station, all of the Ningaloo region, even some of the places we stayed, like Janes Bay, like we stayed at Port Billy, but Janes Bay was the next one over. The Pilbara stations, Kimberley region, Gibb River Road. So even on our drive into regional Queensland, we have found a story of someone's dog having licked a bait and passed away. So it is scary. It sounds horrific, I know, but if you can hear about how many places we've mentioned, Wally is still with us. Wally has had an amazing adventure with us. But we have actually stayed in these regions where 1080 baiting has taken place. But if you are not aware of it and you've let your dog off leash, things can go wrong. So what does this mean? What does it do? how can we help? How can we help them, Dan?
Yeah, so I think it's probably important to understand what the 1080 bait
Yeah.
does and what are the symptoms. And look, you may not be able to do anything about it because often if they start showing symptoms, it may be too late. But you can always try and get to a vet and see what happens. So on a biological level, what 1080 does is it starves the calcium and the energy from cells, and it does it really, really rapidly. So it disrupts the nervous system to an extent where basically it leads to unconsciousness and death, usually within 3 hours. Some signs of poisoning include restless behavior such as running, barking for no apparent reason, vomiting, urinating and defecating randomly and uncontrollably, convulsions, difficulty breathing, coma, and of course death. So it's a horrible, horrible way for them to die. And again, we don't want you to be alarmed, but just be alert as to what the symptoms are. And if your doggo or catto starts displaying them, it's probably time to get to a vet stat.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there's much that can be done in these circumstances. So you really, really just have to do your best to prevent. And how did we prevent on the trip? We have found ways to prevent. Didn't prevent my anxiety, but it prevented, as much risk as possible.
I will say initially about your anxiety, sorry to cut you off, but I was initially quite blasé when we started this trip, and I sort of laughed at Anita quite a bit for, what I thought was displaying some annoying tendencies to be a bit overbearing and a helicopter parent, but I've come round full circle, and
when you
like you
start
don't want
hearing
to stuff
people's
around.
stories,
First-hand stories as well. That's the problem.
When you start hearing people's stories, like you just think, oh gosh, and even reading some WikiCamps reviews and people losing their pets, and I'm sorry, it's just the most horrible way to go. There is no antidote, but the only way is just to try your best to prevent the disaster. So what did we do? I guess at the start we were maybe a little bit blasé, like Dan said, a little bit less, strict on the rules, but we've had different kind of journeys with 1080 baiting and how we would act. If we were in a area that is marked 1080 baiting, no exceptions, Wally was in a muzzle. Now, talking about muzzles, we've had a couple of journeys with muzzles. This was our first muzzle. Now, I don't know if you can really see, but
we'll show you on the actual dog itself.
Thing with the dog after, but so that kind of just goes around his neck, and his little poochy mouth goes through here. It just kind of stops him from
opening the mouth.
Problem is it doesn't stop his tongue. So we learned afterwards that obviously licking is still an issue. So when we first bought this was all we could get. I think it was like at a store randomly in South Australia after we had heard about one of the regions we were in being 1080 baited and kind of feeling a bit unprepared. The other problem with a muzzle like this is it's really hard for the dog to pant. So you can't really leave it on for too long because, as you might know or might not know, dogs can't regulate their temperature unless they're panting. So they can actually get sick and get quite, distressed if they cannot pant, especially if you're in a boiling hot part of South Australia like we were. But it did prevent while we were on the Udnadata track, but we were still being a bit overly cautious, so we still had him on a very tight leash. Could this have still been risk? I think so.
Definitely, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. And also, I mean, the licking's probably the biggest issue with this one, and the discomfort. I mean, Wally has never been brought up with a muzzle before, so he was not particularly fond of it to begin with. It was hard to get on. It took a lot of coaxing, and he basically tried to get it off as soon as he got it on.
It's not comfortable.
So, look, if you are going to go down this particular path, just be really patient with your doggo. Just give it lots of treats. Take it on, put it on for just a few minutes, then take it off. The usual way of training a dog is the way to go, but personally, I would not recommend going down this path. Don't waste your money.
What I also would recommend is to be a little bit smarter than us and train the dog in the muzzle first before you leave for your trip. Because we didn't do that. But don't get me wrong, Wally's pretty good. Like, he's very adaptable, but I know some other dogs would just freak out. We've got different levels of anxiety between dogs, I know. And you don't want your dog to be completely uncomfortable. So it's a matter of, you're going for this trip, you're going to come up across this. If you can take the time to do a few weeks worth of training in the muzzle, you're going to make your life a lot easier. So once we had realized that this muzzle was not going to work for us, we did a little bit of research and we were like, well, he needs to be able to breathe. but we also need him to be secured so that he cannot lick and he cannot, hopefully eat or drink anything that has been touched by a 1080 bait. So we heard about the greyhound. I think this is a United Kingdom greyhound muzzle. So it's literally like the muzzles that they would use, in racing. It's a lot bigger, as you can see. So a bit of a different size. This one's a lot bigger. It wraps around the head and underneath I gotta work out how it goes.
The chin?
The chin. So it kind
Do
of...
they have chins?
Anyway, you'll see it when I put it on Wally later, but it just gives like a little bit of extra maneuvering, but he can't kind of get his nose out of here. So as you can see, the depth is much deeper. He's got a lot more room for panting, so he can actually open up his mouth, but his tongue can't come through here. Look, this was our choice, but we have heard there is a really, really good brand of muzzles in Australia. They're a lot more expensive. This one, I think, costs us about less than $40 on Amazon or
eBay.
eBay. Less, and you could get it in all different colors. And we've literally used this at any place that we've stayed that was marked as 1080 baiting. This has been on him. Anywhere that we've stopped on the rest stops on the way, he has been wearing this. Now, do you still need a leash? Do you what? Depends on the situation, I think. For the rest stops, leash, muzzle, that was my go-to.
And Hawkeye.
Yeah, and Hawkeye. Just no sniffing. You should have heard me. I'm like, every 2 seconds, I'm like, no sniffing. Because you just...
But it's a dog. How can there be no sniffing?
I know. So this was our top choice, but there's a really good brand in Australia, but I think it's like close to $200, but it goes around the whole entire head, and it's specifically made for Australian 1080 baits. So it might even be next level up from this one. But the way I trained Wally with this is I actually just put peanut butter in the bottom of the nozzle, and he would just go in there and want to lick. And so when he was licking, obviously a little bit after a little bit, he'd start to get a little bit more comfortable with it. We were doing this on the road, so his learning didn't last too long, but he had to wear it either way.
More of a crash course.
More of a crash course, but he does definitely feel more comfortable in this one. We were able to leave it on for a lot longer. How else have we dealt with the baiting? I honestly think muzzles is the smartest thing to do. But you can, decide to have just them on the leash. Like, I won't lie, we have in a few places allowed him on leash, but usually where we've laid out our caravan mat and he's kind of attached to the caravan, so he's maybe restricted from wandering around the area, so not being off leash in these places, because if he starts to sniff, whatever. The other thing is with Wally, he's a pretty good bulldog. So if we wanted to exercise him, we just make sure that the ball was constantly going, and then once that was done, we'd put him into put the leash on and tie him up and keep him into a small restrained area.
If you're near water, one thing that we have found that's worked effectively, particularly with a dog that loves water, is exercising them near the tide line. So, for example, we stayed in a place in Shark Bay where we knew it was baited. It was very clearly baited. It had bushes behind the beach. We would not allow him anywhere near those bushes. We threw the ball only past the tide line, whether it's into the water or on the sand. And that way, because the tide obviously comes in, it can wash away any contaminated baits as part of the tide cycle. So we found the tide line, it's not a foolproof plan, but it has worked pretty well for us.
Yeah, like I think because it's hard, sometimes you need to exercise the dog, and so you can either, if your dog's fine with a walk, you can just put him in the muzzle, take him for a walk. For us, like Dan just said, we would just throw the ball into the ocean. He'd run into the ocean, come back. And we were just literally being like a team. So one person's there, one person's there. No time for sniffing, no time for looking.
No sniffing.
No sniffing. But yeah, look, there's different muzzle varieties. I think it'll just be a matter of working out what suits you and what makes you feel the most comfortable, what your dog also finds comfortable. Look, like we could say that we have, been to some places where we've allowed Wally to be muzzle free, where there's been baiting, but it is a pretty high risk. I don't know. I honestly just think it's up to you, your own discretion. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, look, use your own discretion, and it's very much a case of prevention is better than cure. You don't want to ruin your trip. You don't want
Oh
to
gosh.
obviously end their life. It's just not worth it a lot of the time. Find your balance between making sure that their mental health is good and yours is as well, and the physical health as well. Yeah, unfortunately, there's no easy answer in Australia. This even applies in the southern states like Victoria, which we've traditionally thought was a lot safer areas, but we literally just stayed at a property where the owner lost their dog near the Murray River, which we've been to the Murray dozens of times and we've never had an issue. We didn't even know they baited around
Not at
there
all.
and a dog's been lost. So just don't be complacent. You know, you use your judgment and yeah, just muzzle up and leash as much as you can.
Yeah, and look, we've seen many people with their dogs off leash in these areas and taking those kind of risks. And I don't know, for me, it just doesn't make sense to try that out or to give it a go. I mean, for Paprika, it's even worse because we really can't muzzle Paprika. So pretty much Paprika had to stay indoors for a lot of these sort of places that we were visiting, which sucks for him as well because he does like to have a little stretch out on the grass. But like I said, you can maybe just let them out into the area. If you've got one of those blow up fences or a fenced off area, you can kind of do a sweep and make sure that the area is safe for them by your caravan or by your tent and stuff like that. That's another way of just, allowing them to have a little bit of outside time without letting them wander too far. The main thing is to really look at their behavior, and if they're sniffing the ground and you know that there's baits around, like, it's not going to work. Put this on.
Yeah, it's that simple, folks.
Yeah, guys.
Yep.
Like, I honestly think, like, I could tell you, a million things that they survived this particular circumstance, but it's just not worth the risk. So I think muzzle's the best solution. This has worked for us. There's other options out there. Leash, very tight leash, very tight leash. Because, even if you're like blasé on the leash, we've heard people again at rest stops just pulling over, letting the dog out, not thinking, just to go for a wee. So let's do that thought and end it there.
Yeah, for sure. So let us know what you thought in the comments, whether this has been useful to you. We'd love to hear your feedback. Remember to hit that subscribe button. Yeah, we're here for you guys, so if you have any questions whatsoever, anything you'd like us to elaborate on along our travels, we're absolutely here to help and would be happy to share any knowledge that we have. Till next time, thanks for watching. We'll see you then.
You're sweating on me, making me overheat, can't think straight.